Hello, and welcome to the North Coast Journal Preview, where we take a look at the stories being followed in the current edition of the North Coast Journal. I'm your host, Dave Frank, and I'm joined today by Thad Greenson, news editor, and Jennifer Fumiko Cahill, arts and features editor of the North Coast Journal. Welcome, guys.
Hi, Dave. How you doing, Dave?
Nice to have you back.
Good. Yeah, sorry I missed you last week. I was taking a little family holiday trip, but I'm back for our last show of the calendar year. So a little different than normal. I hope you guys had a great holiday weekend and hopefully you got plans for the new year. But today we're going to take a look back at the top stories that you guys, top 10 stories that you followed in 2021. Thad, why don't you give us a little insight into, how you guys got that list together and, what are some of these stories that we can look back on that we covered this past year?
Yeah, hard to believe we are here already. I think that's how our newsroom process goes every year. Then we kind of count down our top 10 stories and have the conversation about what's going to be included. The first thing we all kind of recognize is, oh my God, the year is just about over. A new year is upon us. So yeah, I think we do our top 10 list a little bit different than some other news organizations. There's some that just kind of do what had the highest readership. They kind of count clicks on their stories and publish those as a package. This is what was the most read of the year. And then others just kind of go with what they feel like were the most outlandish or most quote unquote newsworthy or clickbaitish or those kinds of things. And we try to both step away from looking at kind of individual stories that published in the journal and really look at topics and really try to think about kind of what were the most impactful things that happened in the year. And our great editorial team kind of talks them through, and we all throw out kind of this big list, and then we go through it and kind of talk about the impact and resonance of each topic and then try to come up with a list. And usually I should say kind of, put maybe a little bit of a finger on the scale, trying to balance a little bit. We don't want it to be, all really heavy negative things, which especially in pandemic years, it easily could. And this year, last year we did the list entirely of COVID stories. So we actually did the top 10 COVID stories of the year and then 5 kind of bonus stories, just because, obviously the first year of the pandemic, everybody's focus was all COVID all the time. And this year we wanted to step away from that and have a little bit more of a varied list, because while unquestionably COVID dominated all of our lives for much of 2021, things picked up and started moving again, and there was a lot of other kind of newsworthy and noteworthy stuff, some of which might have gotten missed actually because people are so hyper focused on health and wellness and prevention.
Well, cool. Thanks for that context. I know, like, when I talk to folks, whether it's people running into me in the grocery store saying, "Hey, aren't you that guy from the North Coast Journal show?" or just friends and family, they'll often bring up some of the things that you guys have mentioned, and so I think it's great to take a look back today. And so there are some. It's almost like the something new, something borrowed, something blue, or whatever. Why don't we just take a little survey around of kind of you tried to be a little balanced this year. Mm-hmm. I say let's start with something positive, like so then let's work through. And of course, we're going to end up on COVID just because there's a preponderance of COVID stuff. But let's start with a positive one. What's one of the positive stories that made the list?
Yeah, so one I'll just mention briefly was the renaming of Patrick's Point State Park as Sumeg State Park, which we view as a really positive step for the North Coast, but as for California as a whole, as it was the first the first state park renamed as a part of this statewide campaign of kind of atoning for certain things in the states past. And then we also reported extensively this year, not in one kind of huge story, but in bits and pieces, about the really exciting news, I think, that Humboldt State University is kind of barreling toward becoming the state's third polytechnic university, which I think is slated to happen next month. So it's probably going to be a pretty big story in 2022 as well. But it seems like that really solidified in 2021 as a thing that's going to actually happen. And, for a university that's had declining enrollment and some other real challenges, this promises to really boost that up, get the university itself on solid footing again, and then also be an economic boon to the area. HSU is such an economic driver for everything in Humboldt, and the prospect of it really growing and doubling in size over the next handful of years is ultimately a good thing for Humboldt County.
Yeah, so the SUMEG story, I think, for folks that don't know, it provides a balanced, not just the renaming, but there was also this balanced perspective of understanding of history, and communities, other communities could now follow the lead because it's like a precedent-setting change. So I think that's fantastic. I agree that's a really great story. And then also, like you said, with HSU, so it's there's just one more vote, right? And there's going to be, once it passes that vote, assuming it does, then we're talking doubling the student population, $500 million of money, and sort of being a magnet for growth and enterprise. So it's just all fantastic news on those two fronts.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that one of the exciting things that I think gets sometimes lost in the HSU conversation is, it's in some senses, it's more of a branding designation than anything. It's bringing resources and kind of this new name to HSU, but it really allows HSU to double down on what are already its strengths as far as sciences and wildlife studies and stuff like that.
So what about before we get to COVID, what about things that are somewhat more sketch, a little bit negative, but yet big and important stories that people might have missed this year?
Yeah, so the one that is is unquestionably awful and heartbreaking is the triple homicide that occurred in Lolita on the Bear River Rancheria at the beginning of the year. We lost a young couple and their 16-year-old daughter in what seems like just a really senseless murder. And I should add the perpetrator was 18 years old at the time and now faces life in prison. So just a reverberating tragedy for that really tight-knit community, and a huge loss for the Bear River Rancheria, but then also for Lolita, where the two of the victims worked as in the aftercare program, were pretty beloved figures. So that unquestionably is just there's no silver lining there. It's just a terrible story, but one that we felt like just really had to be included. Another one that is pretty glum, honestly, is the recycling situation. Iridian Caceres, our staff writer, has reported kind of extensively throughout the last couple of years about just this devolving CRV crisis in Humboldt County, but really in all rural areas of the state, and how the recycling system and incentive system that California set up, to allow people to pay a deposit when they get a beverage or a bottled or canned item, and then allow them to redeem that deposit as an incentive for them actually recycling those materials, has just really collapsed. And so currently, for the last year, really, there's been no CRV center in Humboldt County. There's hope that one is opening in the new year, but that has been, for an area that prides itself on being green and doing, recycling and reusing and stuff like that. Not having an operative CRV center is really unfortunate.
Indeed. So there's a little bit of, potential justice in the first one that you mentioned, because I think the person is pleading guilty ultimately, and.
Yeah, he's pleaded guilty, and he's due to be sentenced next month, and under an agreement that he'll be sentenced to 150 years to life in prison.
It's tragic.
Mm-hmm.
And then also there's a silver lining that possibly the broken recycling system in our community will be at least somewhat restored relatively soon. So these stories are complicated, but worth people looking into again and learning a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
Before we get into COVID, I thought of the idea. I know a couple of these are environment and related to really important hot button issues for folks, because we've obviously got drought and wildfires. Mm-hmm. And all sorts of other things going on and knock-on effects because of those decisions. So why don't you tell us one or two of those that you've got in there?
Yeah, one of the top stories of 2021 was kind of developments on the Klamath River, which are really, as you said, complicated and kind of multifaceted. But on the one hand, the Klamath Dam removal effort has really gained steam this year. An agreement was reached at the end of 2020 to kind of get that agreement back on track or the removal project back on track, but it has really picked up steam this year and seems really close to being on track for those dams to be coming out in early 2023, which is really exciting news for anybody who cares about the health of the river system. And I should say the health of the river system and the Yurok and Karuk tribes who really depend on it, and whose culture and sense of selves are really tied up in the river's health. But at the same time, as that exciting development, those exciting developments have happened, it's really become clear that the dam removal is a race, and that the salmon species on the Klamath are really being wiped out by poor water quality conditions, and had just another disastrous year with upwards of 90% of juvenile fish dying early in the year, and then the threat of a massive fish kill late in the year, which kind of ironically was only staved off because of smoke from the wildfires, which really clouded out the sun for almost a couple months along the Klamath, and really kept water temperatures low enough to avoid kind of a massive fish die-off. But the situation there is dire, and the only thing that's really going to help it in the short term is getting those dams out.
Which segues to the climate crisis issue.
Yeah, and then obviously, anybody who lived up here knows that we had 2 months of 2021 that were just dominated by wildfire. We had drought issues all year long, but then August and September, we had poor air quality. We had communities, in Humboldt counties, northeast and southeast, just totally inundated with wildfire and under constant threat. So inescapably, yeah, climate and climate crisis and fire were big parts of 2021 on the North Coast.
And I guess we'd be remiss if we didn't touch on at least a couple of the topics that you've added into this year's list of top 10 stories that are COVID related. Do you want to tell us, just give us a little intro into a couple of those stories that made the list?
Yeah, like I said before, we didn't want the list to be too COVID dominant, even though our lives, it's been COVID dominant over the last year. So we picked two categories where we can kind of work in lots of elements of what we've all been experiencing this year. And so we focused on the Delta surge, which is when the kind of the dire projections that health officials have long had about what could happen here really came to fruition, as far as triaging in our hospitals and healthcare workers just becoming truly overwhelmed, and infection becoming just really widespread. And so that's the Delta wave that really hit and started in July or June, but really hit in August and September. And then we focused on vaccines, both the arrival of vaccines, which was such a hopeful moment early in the year when Humboldt County's first folks were vaccinated, and they were holding mass vaccination clinics that drew thousands of people. And it really seemed like the beacon of hope that was going to get us out of the pandemic. And did have lots of silver linings as far as, allowing kids to get back into school in the fall and things like that. But then also, the kind of the frustration of slow uptake and vaccines. We're having some of our worst months since the pandemic began just recently, despite vaccines being widely available. So,
and not just locally, nationwide. I mean, we're running into this problem. I think as we most recent data we heard from yesterday was nearly 500,000 people were confirmed cases yesterday. So it's a very serious issue, and it's even more serious for the unvaccinated folks. So you guys, we have our work cut out for us, I think, and just getting the word out to our friends, colleagues, neighbors, and community members. Thank you so much for the summary of these top 10 stories of the year. I strongly encourage everybody to check it out. It's contributions from you and some of the other folks at the North Coast Journal, giving these concise kind of insights that hopefully will stimulate people to learn more. Stay informed.
Yeah. Please check it out and tell us what we missed. Tell us what we got wrong.
Right on. Thank you.
They will.
Jennifer,
they
will. They'd love to let you know. And speaking of reaching out to let you know, let's
Oh, yeah.
Jen, what's your list look like this year? Your top 10 stories. We're going to let you describe what they're not quite stories, are they? They're moves. So I'll let you tell us what your top 10 moves of the year are.
I went back in our archives and I realized that we started this in 2016, and it actually grew out of the top 10. And one of the things that we did, was we sit around, as Thad described, in the newsroom, and we kind of go, well, what was what was this year, we kind of marvel at, oh my God, all of this was this year, and wasn't that last year? And, the flat circle of time becomes clear. But I remember thinking there were so many things that were just, oh, they still make my blood boil, but they weren't big stories. They were just petty, small, and rotten. The things that we colloquially call D moves. If you don't know what the D stands for, ask your kids. They will tell you. But essentially, it's something like if you borrow someone's car and then return it with the gas tank empty. Why? It's selfish, it's petty. You could have done the right thing and it would have been fine, but you didn't. And it's just, it's that. Sometimes it's criminal, sometimes it's not, but it's always something where you just think, that was a D move. And you all know what I mean. Although every year I do get emails, letters, DMs, etc., that tell me I'm a terrible person. And what if we substituted female genitalia? But I think we all know that the cultural context is quite different. And when they start building, skylines and space rockets that look like lady parts, I guess I'll think about it. But for now, we have this with the top 10 D moves of 2021, is it? What year is it? And they also yielded some groupings, just as our top 10 stories did. There were some people who were really focused on making the pandemic harder for all of us, including, I don't know if you heard about this, it wasn't, I don't think it was a story we actually reported on, but it was a small incident of foolishness where a bunch of people showed up at Eureka Natural Foods without masks to demand to be allowed to shop without masks because of their deep misunderstanding of the Constitution and private property and private businesses. And having this big to-do and making a big stand was, a big health risk, inconvenience, difficulty, and stress on people who are trying to feed you, and also fellow shoppers who are trying to feed themselves. And I did notice that, over the course of the pandemic, since last year, it really is food businesses, people who bring you food and drink, for some reason, seem to be the people that get lashed out at the most. I include flight attendants here, praying for you, flight attendants. All of the banks, real estate offices, other businesses, mainly it's some retail for sure, but also food businesses. People really feel like, you are my servant, you should do what I say. How dare you impose rules on me? And if you are feeling that way, you should maybe think about your relationship with people who have brought you food since childhood and ask yourself if you need to go fix that. So there was that. And there are also, if you're a person who loves public comment, it's okay. We know you're out there flipping channels at night, and then you get to Access Humboldt and you get to the public comment, and there's someone there with a tinfoil hat who wants to talk about lights over the Arcata Forest. That's my favorite thing too. I get it. I do want to watch school board meetings turn vicious. I am a terrible local politics rubbernecker. But lately it has been ruined because it has been overshadowed by people who just want to spread vaccine misinformation and mass misinformation and attack people and scream about the Constitution. So much screaming. It's something that's happening nationwide, and sadly we are no exception. So that sort of cluster of people made it onto the list. Also, we had a weird rash of thefts. And so 2 different members of the list this year include the people who stole swords from North Coast Repertory Theater. There was, in fact, a sword-related stabbing that happened shortly after, but I checked and it was unrelated, not the stolen swords. So don't confuse it with that. But then there was also the theft of the commemorative Lord of the Rings ring, which was it's like this big, isn't it? It's like giant because, yeah, it's like a giant ring. And it's at least donut sized. And it was not me. Um,
It was a
but
gift, right? It was a
somebody stole
gift.
that. It was a gift from our sister city in New Zealand, and somebody made off with it. And curse you forever. I hope the Nazgul are following you. I hope you end up, you know. Now, who had their finger bitten off? You know what? No spoilers. I know it's a 100-year-old book, but still. I hope you end up in the fires of Mordor. And then there was a couple incidents of real anti-LGBTQ plus tomfoolery. Trying very hard not to swear. One being the St. Mark's Lutheran Church in Ferndale putting up a sign asking people if they've been hurt by LGBTQ culture. Like what? They bought up all your Lady Gaga tickets? I don't know. How have you been hurt? Has art and culture been too good? Have the sciences been too advanced? I don't know. Good people in your community continue living their lives and being happy and it's hurting you? I don't know. But it resulted in a giant parade, a pride parade, because the LGBTQ community and allies in Humboldt are ready to show up. They have all this rainbow clothing in their closets ready to just bust it out. There's capes, full sundresses. It was impressive. Go look at our slideshow in the archives. And the same thing happened when somebody tore out some flags and damaged them at a community garden in Arcata. There was a instant sort of pop-up protest about it where everybody showed up, and it's always like a, you know, joyful sign holding, lot of color, and then somebody came and cut down the tree that they decorated. Really, the tree, my man or lady? It is just, yeah, it's beyond me. And then there were a few people who made the list because they were just caping for awful people. On the one hand, you know, we have those great renamings like the Sumeg renaming, and then we also had the removal of the Madison Grant plaque. You guys might remember from our previous conversations about the Nazi collaborator and eugenicist, who was also part of the Save the Redwood Leagues, had a plaque over in a elk preserve and forest, and the Parks and Rec took it down and have a more involved full history of his involvement and about preservation of that area. And people showed up in both cases, but more so for Madison Grant to say, but you're erasing our history, to which I just have to say, on behalf of so many people who feel this way, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? So they made the list along with some people who decided that they really had to stand up for the now notorious Eureka police officers who were texting each other in a thread among their unit, talking about just humiliating, awful stuff about women, about homeless and mentally ill people, joking about shooting a military veteran who had a mental crisis and ended up getting shot by police. They were, just the most horrible kinds of stuff that you could say. And it really showed a lack of character and a lack of fitness for the job. Theirs is bigger than a D move, but the people who showed up to say, oh, they're just letting off steam. Oh, that's just locker room talk. We all do it. Do we though? Because I feel like you're telling on yourself. So they made it onto the list, but it's a full and seems to get fuller every year list. It's only 10. It's tough to narrow it down. Feel free to share with me what I left off.
Our basket runneth over.
Yeah.
Yes, it does.
So a bushel of D is one of your quotes from the article. The prose in there is so clever. I commend you. I laughed the whole time. It's, even though it's tragic, it's a wonderful read. So thank you, Jen.
Thank you.
It's cool. I'm sharing it widely, definitely. That's about all the time we have. We're up against it. I wish we had a little more time, but unfortunately, we're gonna have to wait till next week. Thad and Jennifer, thank you so much. This was really great. Happy New Year to you. Hopefully you guys have safe and healthy and happy celebrations over the weekend.
Thanks,
Happy New Year to you too.
North Coast Journal is available online anytime and available newsstands now. Pick one up, stay informed, have fun, stay safe, and until next time, take care.